Welcome to the 147th edition of Europe Calling, today organized in cooperation with the Environmental Justice Network. My name is Maximilian Fries. I am the Managing Director of Europe Calling, and I'd also like to extend a special welcome to our guests, and I will introduce them in more detail later. Just to save some time, you will now see a slide. And on the slide, you will see the structure of our discussion this evening. We will be starting with an introduction by Stephen Trent, and then we see a beautiful video, and we'll hear our German Federal Minister for the Environment, Steffi Lemke, and there will be 3 talks following that, 3 different perspectives. And we have somebody from our German Economy Ministry, Franziska Brantner, the State Secretary. Very happy to have her as well. So we're really delighted to have so many people interested in the topic, and there'll be a Q&A afterwards. So you can find a link in the chat and on the slide. And as always, with Europe Calling, you can ask your questions and also give a thumbs up or thumbs down for others, the question of others. So please don't hesitate to do that, because we'll bring up the questions that got the most thumbs up. We have a recording, so just think about it when you name names and give certain information. Stephen Brand, CEO and founder of the Environmental Justice Foundation, with whom we have organized this evening. Off you go.
Thank you very much, Maximilian. Well, good morning and good afternoon, indeed good evening to all joining us wherever you may be in the world. And thank you very much to Europe Calling and Maximilian Fries for organising this webinar and being our host today. A very warm thank you also to our panellists, Steffi Lemke, Federal Minister for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, Franziska Brantner, Parliamentary State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, Claudia Becker, Senior Expert, Sustainable Supply Chain Management for BMW, and Dr. Lisa Levin, Distinguished Professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. My name, as Max said, is Steve Trent, and I'm the CEO of the Environmental Justice Foundation, an international non-profit organisation working at the intersection of environmental security and human rights. With active presence in 16 countries across 4 continents, we campaign locally, nationally, and globally for reforms to protect and restore our natural world and defend the basic human rights to a secure environment. As Max mentioned, we're going to show a short film that will explain some of the key issues and concerns we have with deep sea mining. But before this, I want to highlight a few of our main concerns and make clear from the outset that deep sea mining is neither needed nor wanted, except by a tiny number of commercial interests concentrated in the mining companies that wish to benefit from this new extractive industry. The deep sea, the areas below 200 meters, covers 2/3 of the sea floor and comprises more than 95% of the Earth's living space, its biosphere, with around 98% of ocean species living in, on, or just above the sea floor. We are only now beginning to explore and understand this vast part of our natural world. Scientists currently estimate that between 500,000 and 10 million species coexist in the deep sea, a diversity on par with that of the tropical rainforests. The large majority of these species remain undocumented, unnamed, and unknown. It is a simple fact that we know far too little about deep sea environments and the growing number of species that are gradually being uncovered by science. Indeed, we seem to know far more about the surface of the moon than we do about the ocean deep on our own planet. And it is in this context that I see it that a few narrow interests are now pursuing a forceful program of lobbying and advocacy to push ahead with deep sea mining, without delay, without further study, without quantifying the damage it would cause, and without knowing the true costs. But at the same time, we do know that the deep sea mining at any scale will damage ecosystems, impact species, possibly irreversibly, likely disrupt the carbon cycle, and possibly lead to further large-scale releases of greenhouse gases, all while impacting global food supply and security. We do already know that the Greenland shark, an animal of the deep and our planet's longest living vertebrate, can live for 270 years. We do know that corals, estimated to be over 4,000 years old, exist in these environments. And we do know that deep sea sponges have been documented at 11,000 years old, the oldest living animal on our blue planet. This biodiversity is important, fragile, and irreplaceable, as are the deep sea environments in which they live. So today we see corporate interests, such as the metals company based in Canada, say that the true costs, the environmental and ecological impacts, are both justifiable and inevitable, since we need the resources, the minerals and metals of the deep sea to successfully manage our transition to renewable energy and a zero carbon economy. However, I would contest that many studies have shown that this is not the case. On the contrary, allowing DSM to push ahead now will exacerbate many key challenges we face today by degrading key elements in our ecosystem. A system that regulates our climate, our weather, our drinking water, and vast amounts of global food supply, that gives us our every second breath, producing far more oxygen than all the world's forests combined. In doing this, it would undermine our national and global economies, threaten our ecological security and food supply, and undermine our efforts to combat global heating and the climate crisis. And this is why EJF has reached the conclusion that the critical gaps in our understanding of the deep sea prevent the fully informed science-based decision-making that is clearly needed. Additionally, we call into question the opaque and unrepresentative and perhaps undemocratic structure of the International Seabed Authority, which seems poised to approve deep sea mining behind closed doors. My position on this is absolutely clear. Until credible, transparent, and independent governance structures are in place, no democratic or even legitimate decisions about deep sea mining can be made in the interests of all humankind. The proposals for deep sea mining raise profound issues of environmental justice. Who will benefit from this industry and who will pay the costs? I believe it's clear that the rewards will go overwhelmingly to a small number of wealthy nations and corporations, and the costs will accrue to a global population, again, overwhelmingly impacting the poorest and most vulnerable, first and worst. There are many, these are the summary reasons, I would say, for our strong praise for the thoughtful, science-based approach of the German government and the major corporations that seem to be calling for more study and a precautionary pause. Companies like BMW, who you will hear from later, but including other global giants, Microsoft, Google, Volkswagen, who seem to understand that the economic, ecological costs of this new extraction industry are far too great potentially to undertake without true understanding. So to all parties, I say, do not let this potentially devastating extractive industry embark on its operations without the science and study. The precautionary pause that has been called for is essential. Thank you, Max. And if we could now play the film.
That's good. What are you? What is that? It's like a squid, maybe? Wow. I've never seen anything that looks like this before.
How many organisms are on this one structure? That's a great question.
Wow.
It's huge.
Oh my gosh.
And the colors, cool. That is beautiful.
Wow. Never seen one like that.
The vast and unexplored wilderness of the deep sea harbours an abundance of enigmatic life, a wealth of mysterious creatures and secrets yet to be discovered. We know very little about our planet's least explored habitats, but all scientific observations indicate one thing: the deep sea is crucial for the health of our planet. Yet, as the climate emergency accelerates, this unspoiled haven has emerged as a new frontier for devastating resource extraction. The starting gun has been fired. The race to start deep-sea mining has begun. This office in Kingston, Jamaica, houses the International Seabed Authority, an organisation that manages the global seafloor in all areas beyond national jurisdictions. This year, the ISA is aiming to greenlight large-scale commercial deep-sea mining. This would mean removing resources from the seabed, which are rich in the minerals used in the lucrative production of renewable energy technologies. This process, planned to cover an area of continental scale, will significantly disturb the delicate environment of the deep sea, lead to irreversible biodiversity loss, and likely have devastating consequences for our ocean, its wildlife, and the people who depend on both. Mining companies want to extract minerals that form an irreplaceable habitat for ocean life and are essential for the deep-sea food web, such as the most sought-after ores, polymetallic nodules. To bring these deposits to the surface, heavy machines would plough the seabed, leaving behind permanent scars and crushing marine life in their path. The process will be hugely damaging, creating suffocating sediment plumes and dispersing polluting waste throughout the water column. Light and noise pollution on a never-before-experienced scale will be massively disruptive to marine life, including some of our ocean's most beloved inhabitants. Deep, dark, cold conditions impose different rules on the deepest parts of our ocean. Life moves slowly here. Life recovers slowly here too. But it is also a vast wilderness that bursts with life. Almost every voyage to the abyssal plains uncovers astonishing new species, only found in the deepest parts of our ocean. The deep sea is also a significant carbon sink. Mining operations will stir up millions of tons of seafloor sediments, effectively re-injecting millions of years of accumulated carbon into the oceanic cycle. Because of these potentially devastating impacts, a precautionary, science-based approach must be applied. But currently, crucial decisions are being made behind closed doors by a handful of individuals within the ISA. This organisation needs reform to ensure it acts on behalf of us all. Or, as we've seen from the fossil fuel industry, profits will enrich a powerful few, with developing states and vulnerable communities burdened with the consequences. The vital green transition is needed, but can be achieved without destroying ecosystems. Some of the world's largest companies, Philips, Google, Volvo, BMW and Samsung, have all committed not to use deep-sea mining minerals in their products. Throughout history, territories on land and in water have been plundered for profit, often irreversibly, at the expense of our natural world. Now, humankind has a chance to follow the science and protect one of our last pristine wildlands before it's too late.
Vielen Dank, Steven. Und jetzt...
Thank you, Steven. My microphone was off. Let's continue. We will now hear our Federal Minister, Steffi Lemke, for nuclear security, protection of the environment. I'm very happy, Dr. Lemke, to have you. Very happy that you've taken the time to present your position and your attitude, to share that with you. You have the floor.
Ja, dann bedanke ich mich für die freundliche Begrüßung und sehr geehrter...
Yes, I would like to thank you very much for this very warm welcome, dear Mr. Fries, dear Mr. Trent, dear Ms. Levin, dear Ms. Becker, dear listeners. It is really a good week, I must say, to talk about and to discuss deep sea mining. And therefore, I am particularly happy that we have so many listeners, because last weekend, it was possible to really achieve a breakthrough for the protection of the high seas when the BBNJ treaty was concluded in New York. This is really a paradigm shift for the protection of marine life in those times of geopolitics. This was almost unexpected. This is a strengthening of multilateralism, and this time it was marine protection which achieved that. And therefore, I'm really very happy on different levels that we managed this huge effort to bring that to a success. And I really would like to congratulate all of them who participated, who led the negotiations. I would like to thank them for this present they gave us and that they gave to the oceans. And one thing I do not want to forget to mention is that we had at the same time our ocean conference, and 18 billions were actually pledged from different countries. This means we really need money in order to achieve protection. There is still a lot of work to be done, and we have not yet reached the point where we say we have really great protected areas, the entire area of having an office, the regulatory framework, the question which criteria have to be used, all of that it doesn't remain dead papers still ahead of us. So there's a lot ahead of us, but many observers didn't even expect such a breakthrough now. And therefore, it is really a moment to be happy about exactly this achievement for our nature, for our planet. And with this agreement, the word natural protection treaty in Canada, we really got a tailwind for the use when the state community in Montreal decided that until 2023, 30% of the oceans should be protected. And of course, without the high seas, this is not at all possible. And therefore, the BBNJ agreement is really a conclusion from the Montreal Agreement, but that didn't always work in the past, that such decisions were actually taken at the end. And now what is really important is the implementation of this treaty of the high seas. We have different problems. The little video you just saw has shown that very well, that the increased shipping, but also offshore industries really put pressure on our oceans. And of course, the heating up because of the climate crisis and acidification are added onto that. And if we cannot stop these processes, we will really have endangered our oceans. Coral reefs will die and thousands of people will lose their basis for food because they're basically taking their food out of our oceans, not like we in Western Europe, you know, where we just have a longing look over to the ocean. But this is really something that keeps their existence. And therefore it is good that the international debate about marine protection comes more and more into the perspective of each and every one, and that we now really look into deep sea mining. There is an attention put onto deep sea mining we didn't have some years ago, because to exploit deep sea has been much older. And these had devastating consequences for the marine environment. And therefore it is good and it is correct to get back to the heading of this seminar, that we are asking our question, are we really heading into the abyss? Because humanity wants to satisfy its hunger for raw materials in the remotest corners of the planet. The position of the German government on deep sea mining is clear. Since there are really considerable gaps in our knowledge, we do not see a viable basis for deep sea mining. And you already mentioned that Germany will support the idea that no deep sea mining projects take place until further notice. And we are currently facing really decisive international decisions on deep sea protection. And I would like to elaborate on both points, our position and the international negotiations. According to scientific assessment, deep sea mining is associated with considerable risks. You just showed them in the video. And we do not really have a knowledge base to know at all how can we do this deep sea mining in a sustainable way. And therefore, I think, and the German government thinks, the only possible consequence is not to have deep sea mining, as long as we cannot exclude severe consequences for our nature. And this is at the moment simply impossible. And therefore, at the last council meeting of the International Seabed Authority, ISA, in November, Germany called for a precautionary pause in deep sea mining. And if deep sea mining ever took place, really natural protection measures should be taken into consideration. And this means we declare that until further notice, we will not support any applications for the commercial mining of raw materials in the sea. We actively campaign for other states to also strictly implement this precautionary principle. And I am very pleased that really more and more are really doing that and advocate for a consistent protection of the deep sea. Already in the course of last year, several Pacific states, Costa Rica, Chile, Spain, New Zealand, and France, declared their support for a moratorium, a precautionary pause, or even a ban, a complete ban on deep sea mining. And in the meantime, other countries have actually followed with similar demands. Most recently, that was Canada, on the occasion of the International Marine Protection Conference held in Vancouver, and at our Oceans Conference in Panama last week. The discussion event about deep sea mining was really packed, was a conference room. I've heard one of the most packed conference rooms there. It gives me hope, and you also mentioned that earlier, that in recent years, not only industrial groups, but also banks have spoken out against the exploitation of the deep sea, among them BMW, and we will hear about that in a moment, but also VW, Volvo, Samsung, and many others, and they see no need for the extraction of these resources. Anyway, now it is also important not only to acknowledge the knowledge gaps in deep sea research, but to work actively to close them. We urge to use the precautionary pause constructively about what is happening, what is the situation in our oceans. The German federal government funds marine and polar research already now with 400 million euros annually. That means we have already contributed in the past considerably to the deep sea research in areas outside national jurisdiction, where we have already really made a significant contribution to increase our knowledge base. At present, however, we must not close our eyes to the fact that the danger of a premature start of deep sea mining is very real, even though there are no valid mining regulations yet. A special clause in the international law of the sea allows the first application already for commercial deep sea mining projects to be submitted to the International Seabed Authority as early as this summer. And the announcement of such an application has been on the cards already since June 2021, and the community of states must prepare for it as quickly as possible. We as federal government are therefore in very intensive discussions with other states of the International Seabed Authority about what measures to take if such a what-if scenario will actually occur. There are various options, and the best option, in my opinion, would be to have a decision by the Council of the International Seabed Authority as soon as possible on how to deal with the incoming applications. Only then, and only in this way, we could prevent a positive recommendation by the relevant expert body of the Seabed Authority. Before we have such exploration grants, we must really avoid that, because we had the regulatory framework as it was, that we are now so to see, sleepwalk into an age of deep sea mining. I'm really very concerned about that, and therefore we are very committed in order to prevent such a scenario. But regardless of these very topical discussions, and also irrespective of our fundamental position on deep sea mining, we must still continue to actively and constructively support the intensive ongoing negotiation process on the mining regulation. It takes place, this process, and therefore it is important to take part. This negotiation process is very detailed. The negotiation topics range from highly specific environmental standards, but also institutional and liability issues, fee and payment modalities, up to compliance and enforcement mechanisms. And the complexity is certainly unique in international law. We talk about a really almost unbelievably huge area. And that means if 168 states with all the details and all the different legislation we have to adhere to, then this is really clear that this is an extremely complex process. Nevertheless, our goal in these negotiations is a robust and effective and binding set of rules for the management of mineral resources in the deep sea. And this regulatory framework must stipulate transparent procedures, guarantee the effective and sustainable protection of the marine environment, and it has to place the burden of proof on the shoulders of the applicant. Ladies and gentlemen, as far as deep sea protection is concerned, we have reached a crucial point in policymaking. I hope I could make that clear, that on the one hand, we have made a lot of progress in terms of the protection of marine life, but we also have the desire driven by one company to explore mineral resources in an area which is not yet covered by a regulatory framework. And it is therefore extremely important that the public takes part in this discussion, even though most of us will never travel to the deep sea areas, at least not the deepest areas there. We still have to protect the deep sea. Deep sea needs us, needs the European public, but also the international public. And if the BBNG protection treaty of the last week and gives us a tailwind, then I'm very happy about that we have this very final and multilateral agreement. Thank you very much, and I am open to your question. Thank you very much. This was very clear. This was very concrete. And now I have a look at the questions the public can, of course, hand in. I will also have a few questions to you. First of all, this what-if scenario. You said the plan is to go via the council that will then implement the precautionary pause while looking for further regulatory means. And the Belgian delegation said at the end of last year,
close to zero,
to be able to achieve that until the summer is basically close to zero. So I would be interested in your question. Is there really no hope? And what happens if there is not such a pause and we do not manage to put that through and the licenses will just be handed out? And from the point of view of Germany or the point of view of the European Union, what would be the consequence? Import moratorium for mineral resources from the deep sea or from deep sea mining. What could you imagine? This is not the plan, of course, but what happens if? I do indeed assume that we will not have a regulatory framework everybody can agree upon in such a short period of time. This is technically already not possible because there's not enough knowledge ahead of it. And therefore, it is very important to have majorities in the decision-making bodies that such an application for deep sea mining is not granted. And we've been working during the last weeks and months to achieve such a majority. And I think to grant these applications for deep sea mining without having a regulatory framework would actually contravene also the BBNG treaty. This BBNJ treaty demands to have a precautionary pause or to have a moratorium. This is basically the logical consequence from the Treaty of Montreal and from the BBNJ agreement. We do not know yet how many countries will ratify this agreement. This remains to be seen, and it is likely that not all, or it is even sure that not all countries will ratify the treatment. But one has to prepare for the what-if scenario already now, and one has to find the necessary majorities within the individual countries. And our Oceans Conference was a really very important meeting point of international marine protection, because within the bilateral dialogue, we really try to find majorities and approach one another. And I think as well that the huge publicity the BBNJ treaty got will have an effect. And at the moment, I do not give up hope. I do not want to give up hope. I still have actually quite high hopes that we will be able to achieve that.
Aus dem Publikum, eine von Jörg.
Thank you very much. We have two questions, one by Jörg and one by Harold. I'll summarize this. The question is, what about Russia and China? And then they mentioned the United States. What about them? Are they signatories or are they members of ISA? And the same question I think you could ask for the BBNJ. And what about monitoring? The deep sea and the ocean above the deep sea. Oh, this is a vast region. So, and also vessels, etc. Who's going to monitor that? And what about mining in the deep sea? How can this be policed, monitored? Let's say one state, one nation say, well, we go for it and we'll send out 5 ships. How can you find them? And if you spot them, what do you do with them? So who is members? Who is the member of the ISA? And what about policing or monitoring? Well, this is the very question. Well, as you heard, I was very enthusiastic and happy about the results of last weekend. That's what I explained. Of course, we still need to roll up our sleeves, and there's a lot of work. This is ongoing work, work in progress. We need to convince people. We need to convince state when it comes to signing the BBNJ Convention. Many states have never joined the UNCLOS, and China and Russia, well, I don't think they will sign the BBNJ agreement. But let me say, the international community, if they decide that marine protection areas should be granted and certified internationally, it'll be difficult to just do whatever you want on the ocean. To put it very simply, you still have the rules and standards. They exist not just for the marine areas, but also on land. So when it comes to a conflict about resources, about minerals, well, heated and triggered by the global inflation with all its consequences, it's the very moment to go for the circular economy. The circular economy is something we can't do without if we really want to protect our oceans and our existing forests, swamps, rivers. This forces us to act and make the circular economy a reality. And it'll be hard to convince people. But let me come back to the link between these areas, especially when it comes to rare earths for the production of batteries. What we see is at institutions setting the rules and standards and managing the finances, that all this needs to be set. The parameters need to be set in order to start creating protected marine areas. I don't think that, technically speaking, the monitoring would be a big problem. 20 years ago, it would have been impossible, more or less. But looking at today's satellite technology, I think you can do a lot in terms of surveillance. What will be difficult, indeed, will be the enforcement of rules and standards on the ocean, at sea. We have seen a number of cases where this did not work. But this is why we need to inform the public. We need the public to put pressure on companies, on politics. So this is why, given the large number of international conferences and then the moratorium called by the French President Macron, all this is something I'm very happy about, because it makes clear to people how urgent this is. Well, Germany chose for a precautionary pause, not for a moratorium, and that's still to say that Germany thinks that a moratorium is very important as such, and just to call for one has made it very clear how important it is to stop, to pause, rather than continue to exploit the planet. Thank you very much. Yes, this is exactly what we're doing tonight. This is raising awareness with our webinar to support the moratorium. But this is the question I meant to ask you. So great, you've actually answered it. There'll be more questions, I'm sure, from our audience regarding the moratorium, but we could perhaps come back to that later. Perhaps one thing, if you allow, if you permit. The federal government, after the change of government recently, has modified its position, its stance on deep sea mining more towards the precautionary principle and the precautionary pause, but has not signed up to the moratorium. But I think that both positions go together very well. The moratorium is something that the public will understand more easily, perhaps, and has created more attention. The precautionary pause, however, or potentially, might convince more member states who were against the moratorium to join the crew, if you like, and go for a softer version of the precautionary pause. So it's complementary. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. It was great to have you. There's no time for more, I'm afraid. Let's continue. We'll continue with Lisa Levin. We say goodbye to our federal minister. It was great to have you. Thank you very much, says the minister. Have a wonderful webinar. Take care. Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. I have the pleasure to give Lisa Levin the floor at the Scripps Institute. You see San Diego, and one of the leading experts for studying, for exploring the deep sea floor, the deep sea bed, and we're very happy to hear the contribution by Lisa Levin. You have the floor.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. Hello, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak today about deep seabed mining and its interaction with climate and climate change. And I'm a scientist, so you're going to hear some science now. And I'm going to start with the climate. We know the ocean is the planet's greatest climate mitigator. It takes up over 93% of the excess heat in the atmosphere. And this leads to reduced solubility of gases and increased stratification, which together lead to a loss of oxygen in the ocean, what we call ocean deoxygenation. It also leads to less upwelling of nutrients and overall a decline in productivity and phytoplankton production over vast areas of the ocean. The ocean also takes up somewhere between 26 and 30% of the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and this leads to a phenomenon we call ocean acidification, a lowering of the ocean pH. And all of this happens at the ocean surface, but it doesn't stay there. The heat and the carbon taken up by the ocean make their way into the deep sea through what we call thermohaline circulation. And these are transported to great depths in the ocean. And in fact, if we look at warming over the decades in the deep ocean, we find much of it occurs in the southern hemisphere, despite the fact that most of the emissions occur in the northern hemisphere. And we know that the deep ocean is now subject to a warming of water temperatures, to loss of oxygen, to ocean acidification, and even to a decline in food supply. The deep seas and the high seas. And this threatens the unique ecosystems that occur there and the functions and services that they provide, including the capacity to sequester carbon. And I'd like to focus on this a bit. We know that the ocean stores most of the carbon on the planet. Biology and sinking bring massive amounts of carbon into the deep sea, such that the ocean, and in particular, the deep sea, has 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere and 20 times more carbon than found in the plants and soils on land. And we understand this uptake by the ocean of carbon comes from the biological pump. This is a pump in which phytoplankton draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and turn it into organic matter. And these phytoplankton aggregate and sink into the deep sea, or they're eaten by small animals, and the pellets sink into the deep ocean. This was the classic view, but we've come to understand now that invertebrates, fish, and mammals, the biodiversity of the ocean provides really important uptake and transport and storage of carbon as well, through food webs, through the vertical migration, even through the sinking of dead animals. And of course, whales and fish store a lot of carbon. And most people don't know, bony fish also secrete carbonate, which sinks into the deep ocean. So let me just say that these depictions of carbon transport in the ocean often leave out the bottom. You can see there's no bottom or not much on the bottom shown in these diagrams, but in fact, we now know the deep sea floor is full of a wealth of different kinds of ecosystems. And we're coming to understand they provide really important carbon services. So on our continental margins, we have habitats like oxygen minimum zones, canyons and fjords, and cold water coral reefs that store huge amounts of carbon. They have very high rates of carbon preservation. We have vast areas, our abyssal plains, which are the target of seabed mining now, which sequester large amounts of carbon. We have aggregations of animals, like on seamounts, that sequester a lot of carbon. And we have chemosynthetic ecosystems that provide carbon services like filtering methane out of the sea floor before it makes it into the atmosphere, or hydrothermal vents, which fertilize the ocean and fuel the primary production that we rely on for our fisheries. So there are very important carbon services provided by biodiversity in the ocean, but these are, of course, threatened by mining. And here we have a map of the 3 different types of minerals targeted for seabed mining: polymetallic nodules on abyssal plains, polymetallic sulfides at hydrothermal vents, and cobalt-rich crusts on seamounts. And we know that deep seabed mining is, in fact, let me see, I'm not advancing here. We know it's very destructive. And at the seafloor, it creates many different types of disturbance. There's physical disruption and removal of animals. There's a suspended sediment plume that can smother animals. There's altered geochemistry, altered substrates that the animals rely on. There are light, sound, and vibration pollution. There's different contaminants released, loss of biological structure, and changes in the food web, all at the seafloor, that can cause release of carbon, which ultimately may make it back into the atmosphere, and biodiversity loss, which, as I've been saying, is very critical to the carbon cycle on this. Biodiversity is critical to the carbon cycle on this planet. We also have disturbance in the water column from mining can disrupt the benthic pelagic coupling between the seafloor and animal life in the water column. We also have vast animal migrations of whales, fishes, and turtles, sharks that move across the ocean. And mining can disrupt these and the carbon services, the transfer and storage of carbon that these organisms provide. We're still in a discovery stage. We don't know all the biodiversity, and we don't even know all the microbial processes going on. Recently in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, it's been discovered that there's a large amount of deep sea carbon fixation, and there is a large amount of oxygen production. And so seabed mining threatens these processes before we really have even discovered how important they are. Science tells us that mined areas may not recover for decades in the monodule provinces. Simulations of mining conducted in the 1980s were then sampled 20, 30 years later, and the scars are still sharp, as you can see. There was limited animal recolonization, and even the microbes did not recover all their functions. So what this means is that mining will probably, certainly will lead to lost carbon services, and it's very likely that mitigation and restoration of these deep areas is not feasible. So my closing message is that biodiversity and ecosystem integrity and climate are fundamentally intertwined in the deep ocean. And because of the very disruptive nature of seabed mining, we need to proceed with caution. And with that, I thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Liebe Lisa, herzlichen Dank. Das war hat nochmal sehr klar gemacht.
Dear Lisa, thank you very much. This made it really clear what this is all about. I would like to start with a question from the public. Somebody is asking, well, if there's less than 1% or much less than 1% of the surface, which is actually concerned or would be concerned by deep sea mining, is it really such a huge problem for the habitat in the deep sea? Then we're talking a few thousand hectares compared to the sheer size, entire size. Could we get an impression how these relatively small things have actually huge consequences? Could you give us an idea of the scale of it? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. That's an excellent question. The Clarion-Clipperton zone that's been targeted for mining by 20 different contracts is about 3,000 miles across, maybe more. So these are not small areas. Once one mining operation starts, others are likely to begin. But a really important point is there is one ocean. It's completely connected across the globe. And the impacts of mining, the suspended sediment plumes, the release of contaminants, they're not going to stay on the mining footprint of however many thousands of square kilometers the mining actually occurs. Those impacts will move up into the water column, and that water column is 4,000 meters deep in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. Above, in the upper part of the water column, there are important fisheries, tuna fisheries and others. And those impacts can move into the exclusive economic zones of island nations that occur in the Central Pacific. We don't know how long it will take for the plumes to go away. If they do, it's very, very fine particles. They'll stay suspended for a long time. We don't know how far those plumes will spread, but it will be over a much larger area than the mining footprint.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich glaube, das war nochmal ein sehr wichtiger Punkt.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very important point you just made. And a second question, I think I read that you also participated in the BBNJ negotiations. What kind of an impression do you have? ISA, BBNJ, and deep sea mining, this relation. You as a scientist have been working in this field for a long time. Do you have a good feeling, a good impression? Do you have hope or not so much? What do you think?
Oh, that's a tough question. I participated as an observer on behalf of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. And so I wasn't negotiating. I will have to say that it was a real struggle to get agreement on this treaty, and the negotiators deserve a lot of credit for coming to agreement. After, I think they worked the last 38 hours, they didn't go to sleep. They just negotiated continuously. The agreement offers promise. Many of the sticking points in coming to an agreement had to do with how this treaty would interact with other existing rules and conventions and treaties in the ocean, including those that regulate fishing and those that regulate seabed mining. So there is a necessity to align the protected areas that are proposed under the BBNJ treaty with the activities of the International Seabed Authority and the protected areas that the Seabed Authority also creates. And the ISA has been pointing out that they've got the largest protections in the high seas already in their APEIs, areas of particular environmental interest, which are no mining areas. I think, first of all, the treaty has to be, my understanding is it has to be ratified by 60 nations before it comes into force. So there's a ways to go. That could take anywhere from 1 to 5 years, I'm told, possibly even more. And in that time, of course, seabed mining is ramping up. And so I think we don't have time to wait for the treaty to be enforced, but before addressing the mining issues that are being discussed today.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will continue with Claudia Becker. Claudia Becker, Senior Expert Sustainable Supply Chain Management at BMW, the car manufacturer with its headquarters in Munich. And BMW was mentioned several times in a positive way because they have really stated we are against deep sea mining, and therefore we are particularly happy that she is here with us today, and we're looking forward to her contribution. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Fries. During the next minutes, I would like to explain why BMW has opted for no seabed mining initiative. I would like to explain what our position is, and I will finish with possible alternative resources for our fleets. Okay, kindly start with the first slide. Yes, we as BMW started with this topic, deep sea mining, 2 years ago because we were approached as car manufacturer because we have a lot of battery resources in the deep sea. Journalists approached us, sustainability initiatives approached us, and we internally started a discussion and tried to answer the question whether mineral resources really meet our criteria for sustainability of resources. This is really a risk assessment. We have a holistic sustainability approach. What is important is environmental, social aspects, and governance aspects. We collected a lot of information. We talked to license holders, we talked to NGOs, we talked to initiatives, to auditors, and we learned a lot. For example, from these initiatives, they gave us the input, due diligence, for example, OECD due diligence. These are really important things we use for our supply chain cannot be used for deep sea mining. That's what we learned from them. One slide back. And we also dealt with the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, IRMA, and this is basically a best practice standard for certifying mineral resources stemming from mining, and BMW Group is part of it. We're now also part of the board. This is basically the standard for the certification of the resources for our products. And this IRMA initiative decided that deep sea mining is not a responsible way of mining, and therefore it is not allowed to use their audit standard for deep sea mining. That was a very, very important information for us. And of course, the regulatory framework, which was not yet put into place by the ISA. This was a really important point for us because research, as we heard, and all the consequences for biodiversity are not clear yet. Is it responsible? We cannot answer this question yet on the basis of the current scientific information we have. And therefore, we use this precautionary approach, and we have put together a call for a moratorium. We say we are not using these deep sea mined resources before it's clear what their consequences are going to be for our environment. It is decisive for us before we can at all start deep sea mining. It has to be proven that deep sea mining can be done in such a way that the marine ecosystem can be protected, efficiently protected. At the moment, there seems to be a rush onto deep sea mining, and we demand to have enough time in order to find out, first of all, what the consequences will be for this really unique environment, marine environment. And we also demand time for the regulation of deep sea mining. We need to take enough time because according to our understanding, there is simply not enough information available so that the ISA really can take decisions based on solid scientific information, like, for example, for the determination of certain limits. We invite everybody to join this initiative, to join the call, as you can see here. And we are, of course, very happy that also the government is in favor of a precautionary pause. I would like to stop with the next slide, and I would like to give you an idea about what alternative resources do we have. We as BMW have decided circular economy is really the key for the for the protection of our resources. For us, future is secondary, is the future of secondary materials. We have a concept vehicle, for example, so this is a long-term idea, iVision, it is called this vehicle. It's based on bio-recyclable resources, can be 100% recycled. I have a few more examples for our secondary first strategy. At the moment, 30% of our vehicles are produced to 30% made of secondary materials, and we want to increase that up to 50%. And we have therefore very ambitious goals. But we also look at design for recycling. That means we design our vehicle in such a way that it can be easily recycled. For example, a copper cable can be taken out easily from the chassis in order to prevent pollution. Or if we have the cable stem, for example, or the battery, they include very valuable materials. And it is very important that at the end of life cycle, we can get this material back. An example from China. What works in our favor are the national guidelines. The customers have to hand in their batteries after use of their vehicle. We take these batteries back and we cooperate with local recycling companies. They dismantle these batteries, and cobalt, nickel, lithium, for example, can be recovered with the help of very innovative technologies, and we can then reuse exactly these materials in new batteries. We already started that cycle with batteries in our development vehicles. This closed loop is really protecting our resources and reduces the use of new material by 70% in favor of secondary material. And I would like to end and say the use of secondary material is very important. And if we look back at deep sea mining, we say we can only do that if the research shows that this is a sustainable way of mining. And we really say we need enough time, and we call upon everybody to take enough time to find that out. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I apologize for the little technical problem. I have one question. I saw that question in the chat. You already mentioned that cables and batteries. And in how far do you apply that also to the suppliers? In how far can you influence the suppliers? How do you transfer that into the supply chain, in the entire supply chain? Yes, there are quite a number of approaches. First of all, at BMW, we have CO2 as an additional criteria. Apart from price and quality, this is another criteria for us to choose a certain component. This is something we look into for new contracts. Recycled materials, of course, have a huge advantage. At the same time, we look at material intensive components, and then we discuss with our suppliers and we check where can we really increase the part of recycled material. This will then be included into the contract so that we have an increasing amount of these recycled materials agreed with the suppliers. Yes, thank you very much. I'm sure we will discuss that later on also during the discussion, but I have a look at the time, and therefore I would like to continue with Franziska Brantner. Franziska Brantner, she's already here. Dear Franziska, hello. You are very often at Europe Calling.
Franziska, glad to have you.
We know each other very well. I think we initiated it actually together. So it's great that you are here and that you took the time to join us tonight. You are Parliamentary State Secretary in the Ministry for Environment and Climate Protection, for Economy and Climate Protection, and you are responsible for the resource strategy, mineral resources strategy, it's called, I think. And we are very happy that you are here today and that you can say something about all this topic, about the entire topic on behalf of your ministry. And we said it initially, precautionary pause, moratorium, and we had already discussed that earlier, and we are interested in your opinion.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to be here tonight. Well, to join Europe Calling again. And as you said, Maximilian, deep sea mining, you might not think it is, but in our Federal Ministry for the Economy, that's where we look after it. So when it comes to dealing or negotiating with the ISA, this is our house, our ministry. We does that together with Steffi Lemke's ministry, so the environmental ministry. Steffi is very much committed to protect the oceans, and it was very impressive to see also last weekend. It was very important to have her here. So when it comes to cooperating in the negotiations on deep sea mining, it's very important to have everybody on board. And Maximilian, you said, yes, that in some areas, the demand is growing when it comes to new green energies, new green developments and technologies. Of course, we want to see a certain efficiency, circularity, as Claudia Becker also said. So we have to make sure that we go circular. And we're able to go circular, that we have the capacity to do so, so that whatever the material, it's not just used once, but twice or 3 times even with a number of materials this is possible. So it needs to be designed now and it needs to be put on the market very soon, very quickly. So despite all efficiency and going for circular, it'll take a few years. You know, we have to look at the global level. Of course, we all want to have electric cars. We want to get ahead when it comes to digital technologies. We have to make sure to develop technologies that are, you know, more protective of the environment, that are greener, better for the society and more transparent. And these are the main targets really that we set ourselves, which means that in Europe we have to take care of things and say, look, what's our contributions? We can't just point our fingers at third countries and we're not changing our way of life. It's not very credible. We have to, you know, set the example. So in this context, of course, deep sea mining is a very profitable business and is a potential way to go for a number of companies. So Germany holds a number of licenses, of leases in this field. So Germany is kind of an important actor when it comes to ISA and the whole discussion. As the federal government, as Steffi, the minister, has explained, we have decided to join forces to go for a precautionary pause because the dangers or the disruptions potentially are so great and so high. It doesn't balance off, it doesn't weigh off the potential damage. So once we can exclude major dangers and disruptions, we have to stop, we have to make a pause. And at the same time, we need to negotiate with the ISA to create a framework that works. And we don't want to leave the discussion, the debates to states that are not, they don't really take care of the oceans. So it's not easy. You know, on the one hand, we have the negotiations going on, but we can't give out licenses yet. So at the moment, to be fair, within the EU, we don't have all member states on board. Not everybody joined the call for a precautionary pause. So we need to convince people, to convince states in the EU, and that is very urgent to achieve this at global level, to make sure that this pause is happening. So that is something we need to roll up our sleeves for. In the EU, let's look at Belgium, for example. There's a number of member states who haven't joined our ranks yet. We don't have all European states with a green government or the Greens taking part, being a government party. Steffi is a very committed person, and I'm trying to build alliances as well. We both go for green networking to make sure that we get this moratorium. At the same time, the federal government of Germany does invest a lot in studying in the deep sea and the seabeds to understand the ecosystems, the biodiversity better. But it's not just Germany. Of course, these are international scientific cooperations, researchers joining hands. As we heard from our colleagues there, a lot of research is done at multinational level. And I'm not saying it's all a happy song, it's all a walk in the park, not at all. Of course, there are great concerns, and we have to accept to do investments in research and not just look at possible or potential profits. At the same time, to balance things, we have to keep going for research and studies. We can't just say no to start with, you know, we just block things out. If we don't use the licenses, Germany is going to lose them. And we can actually guess who's going to buy them, who's going to take them over. That'll be countries who care a lot less about research. So this is why it's so important to create other majority alliances in the ISA, not risking to lose the licenses. We need to build knowledge. So there's a number of processes running in parallel, as you will have noticed. And with all these processes, we are trying to ensure that we will get ahead, that we will advance, not just to make us feel happy and like we're good persons. No, it's just, it's to create balance. We as the German government, we have decided a major shift. We have joined the coalition demanding a precautionary pause. And Ms. Becker said the IRMA standard is our preferred standard. There's a Canadian standard, but it's not as sound and solid. IRMA is the most strict standard, and it's set up by scientists for the very projects that we want to go for. It's the yardstick we have chosen. So we're happy that IRMA said deep sea mining is not something they'll certify. And this is a good thing. So having said this, I do hope that will be in time to ensure the precautionary pause at international level and the major damages can be avoided. Thank you. Thank you, Franziska. That was a very good note at the end, but this is what I see in our audience's questions. They can't believe, like, it's 4 months only until we have this 2-year window. How could that happen? Lisa Levin has shown images from the 80s showing the seabed after this kind of trawler machine having gone across it and the scars it left. So the public will say 3 or 4 months. It's not a lot of time, and all of a sudden everybody's waking up. And our minister, Steffi Lemke, talked about sleepwalking, eyes open, but we're still sleepwalking into deep sea mining. You were a European delegate once, Franziska. So in the European negotiations and looking at Europe, you've confirmed that it's better that there's no European delegation at ISA because they probably would not act in a very green manner, a very progressive manner. How could that happen? Well, as I said, last summer, Steffi Lemke and I worked very hard on this very issue. We got the legal expert on board to check the processes, to monitor things, and we had this on the radar. We've been in government for a little more than a year now, and as for our positioning, we've prepared everything. So now we've seen this alliance, and we keep doing this work, and also to raise awareness and attention for this issue. Many others do so as well. So the President, Macron, the French president, is one of the main actors. He's an advocate of the issue, and he is very much working towards it to convince other member states to join the ranks. Actually, France and President Macron himself are the pioneers here. We should thank them. They got the ball rolling. So why does it only turn up now? I think that the whole question on materials, on raw materials, for many years, forced labor or minerals produced by child labor, this has sort of left the limelight. There were always NGOs or other actors who've pointed their finger towards that, or environmentalists. It's never quite been off screen, but yeah, many people just want cheap stuff, be it companies or be it you or me. And also the question of resilience. We have to be careful. We have to take care that any debates on raw materials is not just about sustainability, but we have to make clear to people that it's about resilience and security and safety. And that way, I think we get different actors on board who will be happy to join the fleet, join ranks. So Robert Habeck, our minister, will go to Kingston with Steffi Lemke in about 8 weeks, should the clause work and all plans have failed. I can't say anything about their travel plans yet. No, Robert Habeck is our economic minister. We try to do our bestest diplomatic work to create alliances. There was a meeting at the European Alliance, sorry, but the European Parliament yesterday, calling on people to raise their voices within the European Union to start with, to get more votes on board. And I think this is what we're responsible for in Europe, to make sure that we stand united on that as Europeans, and that we can get many more people on board by saying that, well, we won't exclude that deep sea mining is ever going to happen, but the little knowledge that we have, there's no way we can do this with a good conscience. It'll take millions of years for oceans to recover if it comes to the worst. So there's a massive danger of disruptions, of destruction. So we need to learn more. We need to teach more about. Many people think, oh, great. It no longer takes forced labor or child labor to get the rare earths, to get the raw materials that we need for renewable energies. So they see it as an advantage, no longer worrying about whether people work under good conditions, under ethical conditions. But on the other hand, we have a very different issue on our hands, and I think we need to raise awareness to that. People still think getting raw material without people involved is a cleaner way. Thank you very much. Now let's get everybody back, because we have a maximum of 15 minutes to continue our debates with our audience. Stephen, I haven't forgotten you. I will ask a question on climate justice, or on justice as such. So also because Franziska Brantner touched upon that. However, let me just very briefly get somebody in who wrote to us beforehand, Reinhard Lüken, the managing director of the association. Let me read this out for ocean engineering and shipbuilding. So he has a bit of a different opinion, and this is why I would like to give him the floor, and that way he could ask his questions. Dr. Reinhard Lüken, you have the floor.
Ich bin dankbar dafür, dass auch zumindest eine kurze Stimme.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very grateful that at least somebody who has maybe a different point of view can say something quickly. And this is particularly referring to what Mrs. Brantner just said. Resources we need. We will need resources to an extent we are generally underestimating. The deposits we have at the moment are not enough at all. Recycling alone will not be able to solve the problem, because we need much more technical opportunities in order to use what we have. And therefore, via recycling, we cannot cover the huge need we have. Therefore, my question, I promise to be brief, can we at all afford it? Can we afford that when looking for resources in order to have this transition, to really reduce ourselves to 29% of the planet? We know it's not enough. Second question. If we already know that there are enormous resources shortages, do you seriously think that we can implement in the long term an international agreement which excludes the use of resources in the oceans? And thirdly, if we think we cannot manage, is it not more intelligent to allow those on board who are much more sensitive when developing clean technologies, instead of saying we try to prevent each and everything? I think there are a number of misunderstandings. Professor Janisch, who for many decades is dealing with that problem in Germany, says, and I quote, "In the industrial history, there has never been a branch of industry which has been prepared in such a detailed way, way before it was even started, deep sea mining." I think your question was understood. Thank you very much. I do not know whether Franziska Brantner is still here. Otherwise, Stephen Trent and Claudia Becker could maybe answer the three questions Mr. Lütgen mentioned. Can we at all afford it not to use these mineral resources? I can start from the point of view of the industry. Of course, this was a question we asked ourselves, but we looked into the near future. As BMW, we buy cobalt and lithium ourselves for our batteries, and we provide the producers with it. We have signed long-term agreements for that, so that we are at least secured in this respect. Of course, there are different studies about the availability, and I'm not an expert at all, but there are different scenarios. And of course, parts of our planet have not been explored yet. But if you read our call in detail, it's not about a never ever. It is about a call, or it is about a precautionary approach. Do we really want to afford it at all costs? Or do we not want to give time to research, to check whether we can do that in a responsible manner? And this is a call and an appeal I would like to repeat. Thank you very much. And oh yes, Franziska, I could not see you. Yes, great. Franziska, you have the floor, and then Stephen. Yes, 2 points concerning the question, can we at all do that? Can we afford it? The question is, of course, which resources will be substituted. If we look at batteries, there are now already batteries which can be completely produced without. And according to our estimates, it is not right to say or to think that within 10 years or even 5 years, we will have still the exact same batteries. And you cannot extrapolate from that whether what we have on our planet is sufficient or not. And furthermore, there are a lot of cobalt, for example, resources which are still available. I said it, this is not always nice and clean, and we have to, of course, take that into consideration. Also, we have our own resources. This is something we have to look at. We do not have to pretend that we can do each and everything by recycling. We need several resources, and then we will reach a phase where we can do it via recycling. But this is something we need to plan now. We need to start now. But we think, and this is our assessment, without the deep sea, we could not do this transformation. This is not true. No, the consequences for the climate are so high, potentially so high, that we would basically destroy what we try to achieve by the new technologies on the other hand. This is very complex, of course, but we are of the opinion that we will keep participating in the negotiations about the regulatory framework. I said that. We do not want to be like the others who do not want to have a precautionary principle. We do not give up the licenses. We keep doing our research. But at the moment, we think that the risks are really extremely high. You cannot really calculate them. We have good alternatives off the sea, and there are good alternatives we can still develop. But there we have already made more progress, and we can still make more progress in a quicker way. Thank you very much. And now I would like to pass the floor to Stephen. I have the impression that this is something we have now really talked about enough. Stephen, Environmental Justice Foundation, that's the name of your foundation, the justice element. Where do you see, and we talked a lot about the environment, in how far is deep sea mining also a topic of justice?
I think it's critical. All the issues that we've been discussing today, biodiversity, climate, the positives about protecting our deep sea, all come back to people, because ultimately we will all feel the impacts of the decisions that are made, either for the better or for the worse. But I think there's something that's a self-evident truth in all of this, which is that if you look across our planet, it tends to be the people that look like me and sound like me that benefit the most, whilst those that maybe are living in a small village in Bangladesh will reap none of the benefits from deep sea mining, but B, will be the victims of the negative environmental consequences that come through a heating planet, a declining biodiversity, a loss of food security and resources for basic survival. It really is a fundamental issue of environmental justice, deep sea mining. But I feel compelled just to say one other point one other point to this, addressing the question that was just being raised. Put very simply, there is no point delivering a cure that will kill the patient. To make the argument that we must mine the deep sea to provide the renewable energy products and systems that will save us from global climate change and global heating is a non sequitur. It's an intellectual nonsense, because the damage we will cause in mining the deep ocean, as was elegantly explained by Professor Levin and Claudia Becker, and indeed the two representatives of the German government, tell us one thing very loud and clear. We do not have the luxury of choice here. We must leverage science, ingenuity, the manufacturing brilliance that Germany has demonstrated over many years to provide alternatives. And if you'll allow me, Maximilian, one last point. We talk about studies giving alternative views. Well, there was one study that was commissioned by WWF, which assessed the cumulative demand of products like lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, the rare earth elements, platinum and copper, can be reduced by 58%. Right now, if we just start to deliver the structure, the architecture of the circular economy that Claudia Becker was mentioning. But indeed, research goes even further than that. And there are, even under relatively unambitious scenarios, we can see ways and means for supplying this market from existing sources, and indeed do it in a way that it's more equitable, more just, and more sustainable. So I make the point, I close on this, forgive me, I feel compelled to say, we need leadership. We need the leadership that's been shown by the German government, by the German corporate sector, to ensure that we do not have a rush for gold that will kill us. There are no other alternatives, and this timeline of the next 4 months makes these decisions and these discussions all the more compelling. We must look this in the eyes, listen to the science that is available to us now, and act accordingly.
Vielen Dank, Stephen. Und wir
Thank you very much, Stephen. And we are now finishing, but I would like to give Lavinia again the floor. Listening to science was mentioned, and I think we should finalize with this topic, also our seminar. There are a lot of very exciting other questions. How does ISA really function? We will send a follow-up mail about how these bodies work. There are good information about the structure and the division of the votes within the bodies. And I would like to pass the floor to Lisa Levin. Maybe ask her also to give us the perspective of the US. They do not participate, and they have a history of resource extraction done also or protected by weapons by force. What is your US perspective? In July, will there be a decision in favor or against deep sea mining? And what are the US going to do? Is that at all being discussed in the United States?
Oh, gee, you're asking me to represent a viewpoint of the State Department, which I really cannot. But it's important to point out that the US has signed but not ratified the Law of the Sea. So at the ISA, the US representatives participate as observers, not negotiators that cannot vote. but they can express an opinion. And the last few ISA meetings, the opinion has definitely involved protection of the marine environment. So I think that the US does fall out along the lines of believing that there should be, things should slow down, whether you call it a precautionary pause or a moratorium. I don't know if they would, and I can't put words in their mouth. I mean, that said, Lockheed Martin who has expressed interest in mining, has opened a subsidiary in the UK, and they have, and that subsidiary works with the UK and has contracts in the Clarion-Clipperton zone for mining. So the US position of the government may not even align with US industry. I really can't speak to that. But I know that a lot of the scientists in the United States have become very involved in the issue, as I have, and as the deep sea scientists. And we all, for many of us, believe that there needs to be considerably more science done before evidence-based decision-making can occur regarding deep sea mining.
Vielen Dank. Und es war doch noch nicht
Thank
ganz
you very much indeed. And it was not the final word yet. I cheated a little bit. Now I would like to pass the floor again to Stephen with a very important question many people ask in the chat. What can the individual citizen do in order to influence, in order to put pressure on that we at least have a precautionary pause at the end of the day, or even maybe a moratorium? And that will be the final word. Steve, you have the floor.
I can be very quick. Thank you for that question. And it comes in 3 words. Use your voice, your vote, your wallet. Voice, vote, wallet. Call for the protection that's needed. Spend with those companies like BMW that will support the action, and use your voice to demand the action that's needed from government, and vote in the right way. So that's what it is. Vote, voice, wallet. Let's make this happen if we can.
Herzlichen Dank. Damit ist
Thank you very much indeed. And this is now really the end of Europe Calling. I would like to thank all our participants. I thank all our guests. I thank the interpreters who did a great job today. We thank you very much. Thank you. And I would like to thank everybody from the Environmental Justice Foundation. This was a great cooperation, and we hope that we really made you enthusiastic. You have heard from Stephen what you can do. We will send more emails with links, with certain addresses in order to do something. And this is the end of Europe Calling. Next Thursday, there will be another session about liquid gas usage in Europe. You will be receiving a link next Thursday, 6 o'clock, LNG terminals. For everybody who's in Germany knows exactly what I'm talking about. Have a nice evening, and I hope to see you again. Bye-bye.